Welcome back, everybody. It's time for another deep dive. This time we're looking at Axis Bank's second quarter results for FY25. And we've got both their press release and the investor presentation right here, ready to be dissected. So listen to this. Axis Bank is now the #1 player when it comes to UPI payments in India. And they're even rolling out the first UPI ATM like ever. Pretty wild, right?
Okay.
So we're going to unpack all this and a lot more to help you understand where the bank stands and, maybe where they're headed.
You know what's really interesting about this whole UPI thing? It's like they're in the perfect spot to benefit from India's digital economy exploding like it is. Makes you think how this is all going to play out for them, in terms of growth and profits.
For sure. All right, well, let's get into the nitty-gritty, starting with their overall financials this quarter. We see that Axis Bank saw a 24% jump in operating profit and an 18% rise in net profit year over year. Well, those are some pretty impressive numbers, especially, given the current economic situation.
Yeah, I'd say so. Those growth numbers are pretty remarkable, especially with, all the headwinds businesses are dealing with right now. Kind of suggests that Axis Bank has figured out how to not just stay afloat, but actually do well in this environment.
Exactly. Okay, so now let's look at their net interest income, or NII, which is basically how much they're making from lending activities. And their NII grew by a solid 9% year over year. Their net interest margin, or NIM, came in at 3.99%. Think of mint as, the difference between what they earn on loans and what they pay on deposits, like a key measure of a bank's profitability.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You explained that perfectly. But one thing to keep in mind is even though their NIM is decent, it's actually down a tad from the previous quarter. This could be because of, several things. Competition in the lending market being one, and then there's also those fluctuations in interest rates. It'll be interesting to see how they handle this going forward.
Great point. So let's move on to loan growth. Total advances at Axis Bank, which is just a fancy way of saying the total amount of loans they've given out, increased by a healthy 11% year over year. But here's where it gets really interesting. They had even stronger growth in some specific areas. Retail loans were up 15%. Loans to SMEs, small and medium enterprises, were up 16%. And loans to mid-sized companies saw a really impressive jump of 18%.
This really shows how they're focusing on these specific areas. Aligns with their push for digital innovation and, getting deeper into those growing markets in India. They're clearly seeing potential in these areas and are making moves to, capitalize on it.
Definitely a smart strategy, considering how much potential there is for growth in those areas. So let's look at the other side of the coin, asset quality, which is basically how well the bank is managing those loans and minimizing the risk of them going bad.
Well, I've got some good news on that front. Asset quality is looking pretty stable. Their gross non-performing assets, or GNPAs, which are essentially loans that haven't been repaid for a certain period of time, actually decreased to 1.44%. That's a 29 basis point drop year over year. And their net non-performing assets, or NNPAs, which take into account provisions for these bad loans, stayed low at 0.34%.
So they're keeping those bad loans under control, which is always a good sign for a bank's stability.
Oh, absolutely. It shows they're managing risk well and are focusing on keeping that loan portfolio healthy.
All right, so let's change gears a bit and talk about Axis Bank's strategic initiatives, especially when it comes to their digital efforts. One thing that really stands out is how committed they are to this digital transformation.
Yeah.
It's like they're not just testing the waters. They're diving right in.
Yeah, it's not just talk either. The numbers back it up. A whopping 96% of transactions from individual customers were digital in Q2. We're talking almost everyone banking online.
That's amazing. And their mobile app seems to be a big part of this shift. They're really proud of the fact that it's one of the top-rated apps globally, with a 4.7 rating on Google Play Store and something like 15 million monthly active users.
Oh, and get this. Around 13 million users from other banks are using Axis Mobile and Axis Pay. That tells me they're pulling in customers beyond their usual base, which points to a strong and, attractive digital ecosystem.
It really says a lot about the experience they've created. People are choosing their digital platforms even when they have other options. But it's not all about digital. They're also doing really well at bringing in new customers across the board.
Yeah, they added 1.06 million new credit cards just in Q2, and they've been a top issuer for the past 11 quarters straight. That's quite a streak.
That's impressive. So they're definitely attracting new customers left and right. But are they only focusing on big cities, or are they expanding their reach?
No, not at all. They're expanding their physical presence too. In fact, they opened 150 new branches just last quarter.
So they're not ditching the brick and mortar strategy completely. Seems like a good move to keep a balance between their digital presence and those physical branches.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They're catering to all sorts of customers with different needs and preferences. And, they're branching out into new areas, so to speak. They've expanded their wealth management arm, Burgundy Private, to 15 new cities in India, which shows they're targeting the growing affluent segment in those markets.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They're setting themselves up to get a bigger piece of that wealth management market.
And they're doing it strategically by going after cities with a rising affluent population and, that growing demand for sophisticated financial services.
So we've covered their financials and their strategic moves. Now let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. How's Axis Bank doing in this current market and against its competitors?
Well, one good sign is that their deposits are growing faster than the industry average, which means they're doing something right to get and keep depositors in this competitive market.
Yeah, winning that battle for deposits is crucial for any bank. It gives them the resources they need to lend money and grow their business.
Exactly. And it's not just deposits. They're outpacing the industry in a few key areas, including CASA ratios, which is the proportion of their deposits in current and savings accounts, and MSME lending. They're not just keeping up, they're pulling ahead in some really important areas.
Seems like they're making smart moves to grab market share and set themselves up for long-term growth.
That's the feeling I'm getting too. They're not just reacting to market trends, they're shaping them.
Now let's talk about the future. What's the outlook like for Axis Bank?
Well, they're cautiously optimistic, which is understandable given the economic uncertainties out there. They're acknowledging potential challenges like, the global economic situation and how competitive the banking sector is.
So they're not getting complacent. They're keeping an eye on what's coming.
Exactly. And even with those potential challenges, they're still focused on growth in those key segments we talked about, digital retail and MSME lending. That's where they see the most potential.
Sounds like a solid plan, focusing on areas where they've already proven themselves. What else stood out to you when you were looking at their future outlook?
Well, they're also really emphasizing their commitment to sustainability and financial inclusion. They've set some ambitious goals in these areas, and I think this could play a big role in their long-term growth and reputation.
It's a smart move to align their business goals with, broader societal goals. Shows they're committed to responsible banking.
And it's likely to resonate with investors and customers who are increasingly looking for businesses that prioritize sustainability and social impact.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Axis Bank seems to be performing well across the board. Strong financials, innovative strategies, and a keen eye on the future. Anything else you want to add before we move on to the next part of our deep dive?
Well, it's important to remember that while they're showcasing their strengths, they're also acknowledging potential headwinds.
Yeah, you're right. They mentioned economic conditions and competition,
Yeah.
but they also pointed to some internal factors that could pose challenges like operating expenses and credit costs.
Exactly. They're going to need to manage these carefully to keep those profits coming in.
It's a balancing act between, investing for growth and keeping costs under control.
Precisely. And while their asset quality is strong right now, it's good to remember that the banking sector is always vulnerable to those external shocks that could impact loan performance.
True. The future is never completely predictable, especially when it comes to finance. But it seems like Axis Bank is taking proactive steps to mitigate risks and set themselves up for continued success. We'll dive deeper into some of these aspects in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
What I find really interesting is how they're navigating this, complex and competitive landscape. They're not shying away from competition. It's like they're embracing it by actively looking for partnerships and collaborations to expand their reach and, improve what they offer to customers.
Yeah, that reminds me of their partnership with Flipkart on that co-branded credit card. That's a great example of how they're using strategic alliances to tap into new customer segments and expand their footprint.
And it's not just in retail banking either. They're also forming partnerships in the corporate and commercial banking world. Like they're working with fintech aggregators and cloud ERP providers to offer those integrated banking solutions to businesses. It's almost like they're weaving their services into the very fabric of the financial landscape.
Yeah, they're definitely building a pretty comprehensive ecosystem. By teaming up with other key players, they can access new markets, speed up their innovation process, and provide more complete range of services to their customers.
It's a win-win for everyone involved. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's look at another important theme that came up in their reports. Customer experience. Axis Bank seems to be really focused on making sure their customers are happy.
Yeah, I noticed that too. They seem to get that providing a great customer experience is crucial to stand out in today's competitive banking world. And it's not just talk. They're backing it up with real initiatives.
Oh, absolutely. They've launched a program called Sparsh 2.0, which aims to improve the customer experience at every single touch point, and they're investing in digital tools and technologies that simplify banking interactions and, empower customers to manage their finances better.
They even mentioned using AI chatbots to help their frontline staff with resolving customer queries. That's pretty cutting edge.
It is. They're using AI to make their services more efficient and responsive. But it's not all about technology. They're also emphasizing that human touch.
Right. I saw they talked about organizing customer events and engagement sessions. That's a nice touch.
It is. They're going the extra mile to build a personal connection with their customers, moving beyond just transactions to create a sense of community and trust.
That's a really smart strategy,
Hmm.
especially in a sector that's often seen as impersonal and transactional. By putting the customer first, they're setting themselves apart and building stronger, more sustainable relationships.
Couldn't agree more. And it seems to be working. They're seeing good results when it comes to customer satisfaction and loyalty.
Speaking of which, I remember they mentioned their Net Promoter Score, or NPS.
Yeah.
Has that been going in the right direction?
Yes, it has. Their NPS, which measures how likely customers are to recommend a company, has been improving steadily, which suggests that their efforts to improve the customer experience are paying off.
That's great to hear. It's a clear sign they're on the right track.
And it's not just about happy customers, it's about business growth. Satisfied customers are more likely to stay, use more products and services, and recommend the bank to others.
It's a win-win cycle. By investing in the customer experience, Axis Bank is setting themselves up for long-term success.
Exactly. They're creating a sustainable competitive advantage that goes beyond just having the best features or the lowest prices. Now let's switch gears again and discuss a topic that's often overlooked in these financial discussions: sustainability. Axis Bank has been making some impressive progress in this area.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. It's great to see a bank taking a proactive approach to sustainability.
Yes, they're increasingly incorporating environmental, social, and governance, or ESG, considerations into their operations and decision-making.
They've set some pretty ambitious targets, too, like reaching 30% female representation in their workforce by 2027.
Right, and they're actively supporting sectors with a positive social and environmental impact, like renewable energy and affordable housing.
Remember when they said they were going to plant 2 million trees by 2027? It's fantastic to see a bank taking such concrete action towards a greener future.
It's definitely a sign of the changing times. Investors, customers, and regulators are all focusing more on ESG factors, and Axis Bank is clearly committed to these principles.
And it makes good business sense, too. Companies with strong ESG profiles are often seen as more resilient, innovative, and attractive to investors.
Absolutely. By aligning their business practices with sustainability goals, Axis Bank is positioning themselves for success in a world that's changing rapidly.
Now let's turn our attention to Axis Bank's subsidiaries. They've got a pretty diverse portfolio with interests in asset management, insurance, investment banking, and more. It's clear they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
That's for sure. Their subsidiaries are playing a vital role in their overall growth and profitability.
From what I gathered, their domestic subsidiaries had strong results, with a combined profit of 927 crores in the first half of FY25. That's a 35% increase year over year.
That's some impressive growth. It really highlights the strength and diversity of their business model. They're not overly reliant on any one segment, which makes them more resilient to those market fluctuations.
Let's break it down a bit. Their asset management arm, Axis AMC, saw its profit jump by 29% year over year.
And their assets under management, or AUM, which is the total market value of the investments they manage, are growing steadily. This is a clear sign of investor confidence in their capabilities.
Axis Finance, their consumer-focused NBFC, also had a stellar performance, with profits surging by 24% year over year.
And their retail loan book, which is the total amount of loans they've given to individuals, is expanding rapidly, keeping in line with the overall trend we've been seeing in the banking sector.
Their brokerage firm, Axis Securities, saw its profits skyrocket by a remarkable 139% year over year.
That's a clear testament to their growing market share and the increasing demand for their services.
And lastly, their investment banking arm, Axis Capital, also performed well, with a 29% increase in profit year over year.
They're clearly capitalizing on those dynamic capital markets and the increasing demand for M&A and advisory services.
It's clear that Axis Bank subsidiaries are doing exceptionally well and contributing significantly to the bank's overall success.
They're definitely strategically positioned to take advantage of growth trends across multiple sectors.
Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more critical aspect: risk management. Given the current economic uncertainties and the inherent risks in the banking sector, how is Axis Bank handling this crucial area?
Well, based on what they've shared, they seem to be taking a prudent and proactive approach to risk management. They've established robust systems and processes to identify, assess, and mitigate potential risks across all parts of their operations.
They mentioned having a strong capital adequacy ratio, a key indicator of a bank's financial health and ability to absorb losses. What does that look like for Axis Bank?
Well, their capital adequacy ratio is well above the regulatory requirements, which provides a safety net against unforeseen events. This shows their commitment to maintaining a strong financial foundation.
They also emphasize their focus on maintaining a healthy loan portfolio, with strict lending criteria and robust credit assessment processes. It seems like they're being very careful about who they lend money to.
Yeah, and they're also actively monitoring and managing their exposure to various market risks, such as interest rate fluctuations and currency volatility.
Yeah.
They're not just sitting back and hoping for the best. They're taking concrete steps to navigate the risks and uncertainties of the financial world.
That's reassuring to hear. Their proactive approach to risk management is vital for maintaining investor confidence and ensuring their long-term sustainability. Welcome back to our deep dive into Axis Bank's Q2 FY25 performance. We've gone through their impressive financials, their strategic moves and their commitment to sustainability. But now it's time to put on our analytical hats and really examine some of the nuances and potential headwinds they might face.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that even with all this positive momentum,
Mhm.
there are these subtle hints of challenges that Axis Bank will need to handle carefully.
Oh yeah, like what kind of challenges are we talking about?
We'll take their net interest margin, or NIM, for example. While a NIM of 3.99% is decent, it's actually a bit lower than the previous quarter. This suggests there might be some pressure on their profitability.
So what could be causing this NIM compression?
Well, several factors could be at play here. Competition in lending is getting fierce, with more banks fighting for market share. This can push down interest rates on loans, which squeezes those profit margins.
Right, and we're also seeing a lot of volatility in interest rates overall, which can make it tough for banks to manage their spread effectively.
Exactly. And then there's the economic environment. Global uncertainties, inflationary pressures are hitting businesses and consumers, which could eventually impact loan demand and how well people repay their loans.
That's a really important point. Axis Bank is definitely aware of these potential headwinds, and they're taking a cautious approach to the future, but it's definitely something investors will be watching closely.
For sure. The bank's ability to navigate these challenges and maintain a healthy NIM is going to be crucial for their continued success.
Now, another thing that caught my eye is their operating expenses. They've been investing a lot in digital transformation, branch expansion, and hiring new talent, which has obviously led to higher costs.
Right. And while these investments are important for long-term growth, they need to be balanced with cost control to ensure sustainable profitability.
So it's a bit of a balancing act. They need to keep investing for the future, but also keep a close watch on the bottom line.
Exactly. And it's not just about cutting costs, it's about optimizing them. Finding ways to do more with less, using technology to automate processes, and making sure every rupee is spent wisely.
Efficiency and effectiveness are definitely key in this competitive environment.
And speaking of competition, let's talk about the landscape Axis Bank is operating in. They're facing pressure not just from traditional banks, but also from those fintech disruptors.
That's a key point. The banking sector is changing fast, with those agile fintech companies challenging the big players and trying to grab customer attention.
And these fintechs are often laser-focused on specific niches, offering innovative products and services that traditional banks might have trouble matching.
Exactly. So Axis Bank needs to stay agile and innovative, constantly evolving what they offer to meet those changing customer expectations. Their commitment to digital transformation is definitely a move in the right direction. But they can't just keep up. They need to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I agree. They need to be proactive, anticipating future trends, and developing solutions that address the evolving needs of their customers.
Now let's shift gears and talk about credit costs. We touched on this before, but it's worth exploring a bit more. While their asset quality looks good right now, those economic uncertainties we talked about could affect loan performance down the road.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. No bank is completely immune to economic cycles, and a downturn could lead to more loan defaults and higher credit costs.
So how prepared is Axis Bank for that kind of scenario?
Well, it seems like they're being prudent, building up their reserves, and strengthening their credit assessment processes. They also mentioned that they're actively monitoring their loan portfolio and taking steps to reduce potential risks.
So they're not just sitting around waiting for something to happen. They're taking action to protect themselves against potential shocks.
Exactly. And that's what responsible risk management is all about. It's not about avoiding risk completely, but about understanding it, managing it, and making sure they can handle potential losses.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the challenges and headwinds Axis Bank might face. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to their strategic initiatives and highlight some areas where they seem really well positioned for success.
Okay, what are you thinking?
Well, their focus on those high-growth segments like digital retail and MSME lending seems like a smart move.
Oh, absolutely. These segments have huge growth potential, and Axis Bank is clearly making progress in capturing market share.
And their commitment to sustainability isn't just some feel-good initiative. It's a real strategic advantage that could attract investors and customers who care about ESG principles.
I agree. It aligns their business goals with those broader societal goals, which is becoming more and more important these days.
And their strong leadership team, their innovative culture, and their track record of getting things done, all of that gives me confidence that they can handle the challenges ahead and continue to grow.
Yeah, I'm optimistic too. They've shown they're willing to adapt, innovate, and take calculated risks. And that's what it takes to succeed in the world of finance, which is always changing.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Axis Bank's Q2 FY25 results. We've uncovered a lot of information from their strong financials to their strategic bets on the future, and we also took a hard look at some potential challenges and headwinds they might encounter.
It's been a fascinating look at a company that's experiencing growth, innovation, and resilience. We'll definitely be watching closely to see how their story unfolds in the coming quarters.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to the press release and investor presentation and some other resources if you want to learn more. Until next time, keep learning and stay curious about the world of finance.